Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. I come to you today with a tag about irritation, and I hope you won't be irritated by my wet hair. This tag, the I'm So Annoyed Booktube Tag, was created by the wonderful Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading, and inspired by the fascinating discussion by Melinda over at A Web of Stories. Will Chambers, MJ at Reading This Life, and Floss at the Grape Jelly Library were all kind enough to tag me. To be honest, it's not easy to annoy me as long as books are at the heart of the issue. But I'll try to find something to roll my eyes about today. Question number 1. Do publishers ever do things that you find annoying? I occasionally get annoyed by the publicity staff at the publishers, more than I do with things like the design staff or whatever. As an occasional professional book reviewer, that is, someone who reviews books formally for newspapers or online review sites, rather than just talking about them more personally here on BookTube, I get a fair number of offers of either PDFs or physical copies in the mail. Nothing like the number Steve Donoghue receives, but I don't read or write nearly as fast as he does, and I do spend the time to put on pants every day. Anyway, there are times, especially right now because of another big reading responsibility that I'll try to talk about obliquely sometime soon, that I don't review all the books I receive, or even necessarily read all of what I receive. I tend to be careful about what I request, but I sometimes feel a bit buried by how much can arrive even when I'm being careful. Some publicists send advance copies and finished copies without ever following up at all. Some send out one note, perhaps a month before publication, asking if I might like to interview the author, or if I have any questions, or something like that. These emails feel to me like a lovely little nudge to put the book back on my front burner. But occasionally a publicist will write me right after they send me a galley, maybe even 6 months before publication, and ask if I liked the book. Then a week or two later, there'll be another follow-up asking where I might want to pitch the review. And then another reminder appears in another week or two. It all feels too much, and sometimes it even irritates me enough that I ignore the book. Question number 2. Have you ever been annoyed by a spoiler? Even something as simple as someone else telling you that there's a great twist. Well, actually not at all. I'm a huge fan of spoilers myself. If I know where the plot is going, I can really focus on the first read, on what the author is trying to do. And that's what I love most about reading, not the plot development, or really even the character development per se, but how the author is making the magic. Still, I realize that most readers don't feel this way, so I try my hardest to make sure I don't divulge late book plot developments without saying beforehand that I might be straying into spoiler territory. But there's a great twist in my spoiler acceptance. As I said, I don't get annoyed at all when someone tells me a spoiler, but I do get annoyed when someone says elaborately that they're not giving away spoilers, but that there's a great twist in the book. I'll sit there screaming at my computer monitor in annoyance that they don't realize that it's a spoiler in itself. Just an example. Early in our friendship, my spouse David handed me a very popular thriller and told me that I would never guess who done it. It was extraordinarily obvious to me who done it by the end of the first short chapter. I don't know that I would have been on the lookout if he hadn't set it up that way. Similarly, I realized when I was 12 years old that the killer in almost every Miss Marple mystery is the only character who seems to have no obvious motive. And of course, telling you that may have spoiled an entire set of books for you. The third question, have you ever been annoyed by what you discovered in a little free library, a book sale, or a used bookstore? Tell us what you found and why it was so annoying. Too often, I've opened little free libraries and found non-bookish items, maybe a whole stack of evangelist tracts, or even the greasy detritus of a fast food lunch, including a cup linking condensation all over the books next to it. On the other hand, my husband once brought home a winner of a non-book item from a little free library, a pottery beer stein, a Gertrude stein, complete with a little Alice B. Toklas. Question 4. When it comes to short story collections, are you annoyed if there's a novella in the middle of the collection? You know, that's a funny question. I adore novellas, whether they are published alone, alongside another novella, or inserted into a collection of short stories. But I must say that I'm used to novellas being either at the beginning of the book or at the end. I assume I would notice from the table of contents that there was a novella in the middle of a collection. But if I didn't spot it there, I can imagine being, well, not annoyed at all, but perhaps discombobulated, at least a little bit. Number 5, deckled edges. Beautiful or annoying? I love them, partly because deckled edges remind me of the history of the book. For a long time, I thought that deckled edges were a mirroring of the time when pages had to be cut by individual readers to allow them to read the book, a system that existed for many years. But actually, it was not about the cutting of the paper, but about the making of the paper. In the beginning, book pages were made by pouring pulp onto a screen held in a frame, and that frame was called a deckle. If you've ever made paper, a craft which was kind of popular in the mid-1990s maybe, you might have experienced this yourself. Although back in the day, those deckled pages were considered a bit of an imperfection. It was expensive to cut off all those edges, and therefore book producers just often kept the deckled edges. Now, of course, deckled edges are seen as fancy. Question 6. Other people's annotations in a used book or library book. Annoying, or are you okay with it? In general, I tend to avoid buying used books with extensive annotations, especially if the annotations are made with a neon highlighter, or if they're obviously stock annotations made robotically by a bored student. But I rather enjoy minor annotations sometimes. Fairly recently, a fellow booktuber who shall remain nameless sent me a forthcoming book in which he had made just 2 or 3 written comments in the margins. It was so much fun to read right then in the moment to see how he was responding to some of the lines that stuck out to me as well, but which I might have interpreted in different ways. I also have a couple of books with really extensive annotations written in them. In both cases, they're novels annotated by literary scholars who were in the process of writing their own books about those novels. They would be terrible choices for a first read, I think, but they're definitely fascinating resources. One of them I bought at the Brattle Bookshop in Boston a couple of years ago, the first volume of Proust's In Search of Lost Time. I actually can't lay my hands on it right now, but I'll try to link to a video where I talk about it briefly, if I remember. The 7th question. If there's a series or collection of certain kinds of books, like an imprint, and changes are made, are you annoyed or okay with it? As much as I like sets that match, I don't get at all annoyed when they change. In general, I'm just intrigued about why the publishers made that decision. I'll hold up 2 fairly mild versions of changes that were a bit surprising to me. First, the newish publications of the early novels of Jean Rhys. 3 are dark, and 1 is light, and it's the 2nd volume. And second, a Penguin edition that stands out from all the other Penguins on my shelf, including all the other Penguin editions of Dickens, where this volume usually resides. Again, these changes don't annoy me particularly, but I do wonder why they chose consistency in general, but chose to make this particular volume slightly different. First, I'll show you the traditional. These are both volumes that are late Dickens, neither of which I have read yet, partly because they're both very thick. As you see, it's the one with the author's name is in orange, the title is in italics, there's a little penguin in an orange circle, and the same is true on the spine. And this volume looks identical on the front. Orange, italics, penguin in orange. But here, the title's in yellow, and the penguin is surrounded with yellow. Have any of you seen this before? I've seen other versions of penguins, but not this. Okay, question 8. Do the decisions of characters in a novel ever annoy you? It used to so often. Another spoiler here for literature in general. Books with very straightforward plots often rely on deceit to drive the drama. Instead of exploring deep conflicts rooted in characters seeing the world in different ways, authors sometimes rely on characters doing something bad and lying about it to another person. If people in books were just honest with each other and willing to apologize, a lot of plots wouldn't exist at all. It's the hiding that creates the drama. I used to scream at whatever pages I was reading at, just tell her the truth. It will all end unnecessary drama if people are forthcoming with each other. Pretty much in real life, too. When the information is hidden by one character, it makes for what is often too easy plots that leave us with precious little to think about, and therefore those books can become quite forgettable. The 9th question. Are you ever annoyed by how someone organizes their books? Like some of you have already said, I don't get it when people organize their books by color. I mean, their bookshelves are their bookshelves, and they can organize however they like. Still, I don't understand why they're choosing a purely aesthetic choice that risks making their library far less searchable. I do remember at some point in grad school, back in the early 1990s, when I'd poke around the academic library for 2 main fields, U.S. Southern history and women's history. Cloth-bound library books about slavery during the antebellum period all seemed to be bound in navy blue. And books about the history of women all seem to be somewhere between pale pink and magenta, or very occasionally maroon. But that is not what this newer shelving trend is. I know there are many ways to shelve. And in fact, different parts of my own home library are organized in totally different ways. British fiction is arranged by time period, and then within that by author, with books within the author series arranged more or less in publication order. Biographies of those authors are kept separately. Weirdly, I integrate author biographies on the shelves with American fiction. And there are plenty of other inconsistencies on my shelves. But color? Of course, what I hate even more are bookshelves with no books on them, or only a couple of books, but lots of tchotchkes, or objet d'art, or whatever. Okay, the last substantive question. Share something bookish that you find annoying. Let me start by saying that I am thrilled when I meet people with a really extensive knowledge of books. People who have read everything, or just read a lot in particular little categories, or even people who've thought really deeply about one little tiny corner of literature. My own reading is remarkably scattershot and random, with huge holes in my knowledge, even though I've been reading for quite a long time compared to some of you younger folk out there. But I get annoyed when I hear people act like they've read things they haven't. When young people do that kind of thing, I don't usually feel annoyed. I feel a lot of compassion because I know they're sometimes responding out of a misplaced sense of, shame or embarrassment at not having read a particular book or author. Random backstory. I went to secondary school in a place where a lot of my friends and classmates and many of my teachers were not nerds. But I went to a college at a place full of brilliant, nerdy nerds, many of whom had also received stellar educations when they were in high school, which I did not. During my first couple of weeks at university, multiple times a day, I would meet new classmates who would ask me if I had read whatever particular books they loved. It was not a test. It was a way to make friends. And every day I had to say multiple times, no, I haven't. I haven't even heard of that very famous author, but that book sounds amazing. Back then, there was a stupid joke going around too. When someone walked into a room full of people, everyone would all start laughing uproariously. And then they would say that they had to tell you this great joke, which had a long setup and ended with the punchline, no soap, radio. Everyone would start rolling around on the floor laughing again. And the new person would laugh along as well, even though the joke made absolutely no sense at all. They would then receive the humiliating news that they had been duped, and then inducted into the group, who would then play the trick on the next person to enter the room. When I walked in one day, after a day full of telling people I had not read the books they loved, I heard the joke and saw everyone laughing and said, I don't get it. Explain it. Explain it to me. Everyone gaped at me, stopped laughing, and accused me of reverse engineering the humiliation, making them look stupid. Well, I was doing nothing of the kind. I really did not understand what was happening. But after that, I started realizing that when those same people answered that they had read particular books, I couldn't depend on it always being true. Let me be honest. Back in my non-nerdy high school, I acted like a terrible know-it-all. And I thought I was a know-it-all. But things changed in college, really in both ways. I realized there was so much I did not know, and I felt no need to hide that fact. Or perhaps I just realized that I knew so little that I couldn't, in general, hide my general lack of knowledge. I suppose the transition from the experience of being the know-it-all to the experience of being one of the least knowledgeable people could have been difficult, but it wasn't. While I think a lot of people felt they had to pretend that they had read books they had not yet read in order to seem like they belonged, I never had anyone treat me with disrespect just because I didn't know that George Eliot and George Sand were women, and I'd never heard of Anthony Trollope or George Gissing or whatever. And now I do know at least these particular pieces of information. And of course I would not be judgmental of or disappointed in people at all if they hadn't read something that I might love. If anything, it's exciting. I get to share something I think is amazing with someone who hasn't experienced it yet. Well, that's a slightly weird tangent on which to end this tag. I just want to make the argument that being honest about what you've read is a good thing. Thank you, Melinda, for inspiring this discussion. Thanks, Kelly, for weaponizing the questions. And thank you, Will and MJ and Floss, for tagging me. I would love to hear all of you talking about these questions in your own videos if you like, or here in the comments. Thank you for watching today. See you soon here on Hannah's Books.